My name is Paul Julian, and I'm a volunteer at the Veterans Memorial Center in Merritt Island, Florida. The date is July 11th, 2023, and I'm going to be the interviewer for Paul Kosieracki.
Kosieracki, very good.
Kosieracki, and the so with that said, and I'm here with my partner Joe Davey. With that being said, let's go ahead and go into the interview.
Fine.
Okay, Paul.
Should I start?
Go ahead and start.
Hi, my name is Paul Kosieracki. I'm 73 years of age. I live here in Florida, in Titusville, Florida now for over 15 years. But before that, traveled the world, lived across the world. My wife and I my wife of 52 years, we lived in 11 places in the course of our marriage. And leading up to this life experience, I had an unbelievable experience serving in the U.S. Navy as a junior officer, and then working my way through experiences as a junior officer that set me up for life. It gave me the courage, the knowledge, the connections, the ability to, I'll say, ask questions and know when to say an opinion and when to make things work. Having said that, I was born in Western New York in a small little village called Corfu. It's about 40 miles outside of Buffalo, New York. And my family has a heritage out of Poland. Both sets of grandparents emigrated to the United States during the Great Depression through Ellis Island and rolled up their sleeves to develop a life for them and their family and my parents, grandparents, and ultimately settled down in Western New York, one grandparent being in a farming community and the other grandparent being in the technology tooling equipment in the city of Buffalo. And all of these skills that they would work so hard on passed through generations. And my mother and father from both sets of grandparents each had those sets of skills and pushed like really hard on us to learn. So I did. I learned. I roll up my sleeves. I learned. Fortunately, I was also relatively good in the academic world of high school and ended up going to college at the University of Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. And as a athlete and collegiate wrestler, I had a scholarship to go to school at the University of Buffalo and decided I was going to go into the world of business management as part of that curriculum. Now, leading up to that occurred initially in 1967, and in 1969, the U.S. Draft Lottery was formed. And all of the birth dates were drawn of the 365 days, and my birth date of November 9th, 11/9, was number 80 on the draft list of the draft lottery. So during the Vietnam War, I was subject to serving as a draftee, if you will, in the U.S. military. Being in college, I chose to get a student deferment, and I had all the paperwork filled out. And for the last 2 years of my collegiate undergraduate degree, I had a student deferment to stay in college. When I graduated from college in 1971, I then had to make a decision. Now the military requirements were there, and I took that extremely seriously. I knew, number one, what this country meant to all of us, and I was so impressed with the discipline and everything associated with all the elements of our military. So I went to all the branches of the service in the city of Buffalo to figure out, okay, what am I going to do now that my student deferment is gone? and I went to the Air Force, Coast Guard, blah, 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 and I ended up with the U.S. Navy. And chemistry-wise, with the recruiting officers in that office, it gave me a sense of, oh, okay, they know what I'm good at, I know what they need. And the senior officer of the recruiting there gave me a stack of paperwork, which was an exam to take. And sure enough, I fill out 3 hours of tests for this gentleman. And a couple days later, he calls me in and he says, we're going to raise your right hand. I'm going to make you an officer. And I ended up signing up for a 6-year requirement or stint in the U.S. Navy as part of this requirement for me to be set up as an officer in the Navy.
Okay,
you have a question?
Paul, just I digress just a little bit. You're based on the history. Your parents coming over from Poland. About what year was that?
The year I took the test.
No, we're going back to your when you were young.
Oh, okay.
Or back to your family history.
My family history, yeah.
And when did your ancestors come over?
They came over through Ellis Island during the 1920s or 30s,
okay.
During the Great Depression, actually. Okay. And if everybody would look at the literature, as we all know, how severe the financial challenges everybody had during that Depression years, and add to that what immigrants into the U.S. and how they had to work to put meal on the table to eat.
So was it your grandparents?
And both sets of grandparents,
and
on my mother's side and my father's side.
And they came over. And had they eventually settled in Buffalo, obviously?
That's correct.
Okay.
They all in Western New York, I'll call it.
Okay.
The Buffalo and Greater Buffalo.
Okay.
My one grandfather was a farmer, and he knew how to grow stuff. Mm-hmm. He knew how to help farmers who did milk cattle, and he helped feed them and create capabilities that were just unbelievable for the farming industry in Western New York. And he got a hell of a reputation for that. And on top of that, you'll laugh at this, when it came to equipment to get the job done, he knew tractors. He knew what had to be done to get the job done, and tires on tractors, to the point that he and his sons, or my uncles, ended up with a Firestone tire distributorship, and ended up changing tires on trucks and tractors, and you wouldn't believe it. And as a youngster growing up, the reason I point this out, as a youngster growing up, I learned the hard way how to change tires. I had 2 uncles who used to kick my ass when it came to changing tires with a sledgehammer and a wedge to break the beads. And oh my gosh. And I had one farmer that I changed 8 tires on his tractors for him, and afterwards he looked at me and he watched my work on his tires, and he was impressed. And he said to me, when I heard you talking while you were changing all these tires, you need a car, right? And this gentleman, this farmer, had an old car that he was going to get rid of, and he gave it to me as a present.
Oh, nice.
He said, you worked so hard for me, here's your first automobile.
Oh, nice.
And I had just turned 16 and got my driver's license, and sure enough, I had a vehicle to drive. Okay. It is these experiences that reinforce what the job you do matters, and for who you do your work matters.
Right.
Now, slide back over.
Well, let's go
Sure.
back. And on your parents, you mentioned, did your parents, did your father and mother work, or your mother just?
My mother was a house mother.
Okay.
She took care of not only our family, but there was an extended family that had many children that needed support while the other parents worked.
Okay.
So it was a broader family set of responsibilities. So my mother was a dual for all of these families to help make that happen, including myself and my 2 older sisters.
Did you have like a strong Polish community?
Oh yeah, okay. A very, very, very strong Polish community.
Okay, and
one of the first ways I learned how to swear was in Polish.
Was your father? How can I say this? Was he White collar or blue collar?
blue collar.
And did he
worked,
have a lot of education?
No, no. He was a learn as you do type individual, and worked in the city of Buffalo in a factory that did very, very heavy steel fabrication work.
So, and he was a welder, right?
He was a welder, self-trained on the job, and welded for many years, to the point that he was so skilled at what he did. The U.S. Navy, in fact, it was a coincidence. The Navy used to have ships tied up in the city of Buffalo on Lake Erie on the port, and they needed repair work. And my father was one of the few welders in the city of Buffalo that could lay a bead of weld waterproof, watertight, with one bead.
Wow.
And the Navy used that for their submarines and their surface warfare ships.
So he was quite skilled. Yeah.
Oh, he was very skilled at what he did,
Yeah.
and how he did it.
And did your and then let's go to what were your parents and your two sisters? What were their feelings about the Vietnam War?
They were quiet. I knew it bothered them, but they were quiet about it. My oldest sister married young, and her husband and I used to work on projects together around the area, and we would trade off on. He was 9 years older than me, and while we did things, I'll say, I don't want to put it this way, but I was smarter, but he had more experience, and together we had
team.
the ability to get the jobs done.
Yeah.
And Ray was just an unbelievable man that and again, he made me work very, very hard to make sure I could help him get the job done.
Neither your sisters nor your parents really had any real strong feelings one way or the other about Vietnam?
Not really. They were so busy living day to day that the Vietnam War was not yet affecting the local areas around there. It was more, how do you put food on a table tomorrow?
Okay.
And that was one of the biggest challenges. So, having said that, when I went into the collegiate world after high school,
Were you the first?
Were
you the first, Paul?
I was the first to go to college of my generation of family. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
And I did that primarily because I did so well in high school. I had 2 or 3 teachers in high school that saw that I was capable, and oh my God, they pushed. They pushed hard for me to go on to college. They wanted to see what I could end up doing in that process. So these teachers helped guide me, if you will, and that's how I ended up at the University of Buffalo.
And then you mentioned before that you had a full scholarship from wrestling.
Yes. In high school, I was an athlete for baseball and collegiate wrestling. And as a wrestler, being a left-hander, I was pretty efficient at how I did what I did. And the University of Buffalo wanted me to be a wrestler for them on their wrestling team, and that gave me a academic scholarship, a sports scholarship with academic benefit to pay the tuition. Now, the tuition wasn't huge, but I didn't have any money. I mean, how do you pay tuition when you don't have any money? And so I got a scholarship as I was a wrestler in college for that purpose.
Okay, so now if we could, you were in your junior year?
Yes.
Real quick, Paul, can you...
Of my collegiate year?
Take us to where you left off.
Okay. When I graduated from high school, I ended up in college. 2 years into college, the draft lottery was initiated by the U.S. government for the need to have more military service people, and they took the birth dates of the calendar year, and my birth date of November 9th was number 80 out of 365, and at that year they were drawing up to about 125, 130 of the birth dates to serve active duty. While I was in college, I had a student deferment for draft deferment, and as I finished my last 2 years of college with the draft deferment, I was able to get my college degree, and I was again fortunate enough to get that degree with honors. I was well up there in the list and did very, very well with that college degree. To the point that when I made a decision, now my draft deferment was now expired, and I had to pick a service that I was going to step up to. Do I put 2 years in the Army, put a pack on my back, and go march around, or what do I do? You know, I was struggling in my own mind. I was now 22 years old, and how do I put the best foot forward to what is right? And the deep respect I had for our military and our government and our country, I knew I wanted to do the best job I knew how to do in serving my country. Mm-hmm. Now third generation from Poland serving my country. And in that process, I went to all the branches of the service, and that's when the Navy had me take more tests and gave me the ability to earn a commission in the U.S. Navy.
Okay.
And they sent me to Newport, Rhode Island, to learn how to march and salute and all that good stuff. And 4 months later, I was commissioned as an ensign in the U.S. Navy.
What about what date?
What
was the date?
The date?
Yeah.
That was in June of '72.
Was the commissioning? Okay.
The commissioning.
Okay, and
yeah, and this is my.
Go ahead.
Can you read it, or can you see it? Yeah, this is my certificate from OCS as my commissioning as an ensign in the U.S. Navy.
Thanks.
And so, with that, I had, as part of my commissioning exercises in Newport, Rhode Island, they said, well, what do you want to do in the Navy? And I thought I wanted to be a communications officer. So I went through the technology of what ships did to communicate with each other and all that, and I go, that could be fun.
Visual signaling and
so
radio.
So the Navy sent me to comm school for 3.5, 4 weeks to learn about what an officer needs to know about being a communications officer at the very beginning, at the very bottom,
basic.
you know.
Yeah.
So I was in comm school, and I was going to go aboard a ship out of Norfolk, Virginia, called the USS Mount Whitney. It was a communication command ship, and I was going to go aboard that ship. Well, about a week before I graduated from comm school, the USS Mount Whitney sprung a leak. It had to go to dry dock for 6 months, and put it out of commission. Mm-hmm. So the Bureau of Personnel, I don't know what's going on back there, but they said, what the hell are we going to do with this ensign on a ship that's going into dry dock? Mm-hmm. So they canceled my orders, and they were looking for something to do with me for a period of time. And that's when I got a call from the Bureau of Personnel and said, we're going to send you to San Diego, California for 6 months, and you're going to work on a 2-star admiral staff helping them push papers for their training command. And it was COMTRAPAC, Commander Training Pacific. And under this training command, stationed at headquarters in San Diego, California, this admiral had 10 subordinate commands spread all the way across the Pacific Fleet for all kinds of training that is needed for the U.S. Navy. And this training, go ahead, sir.
Paul, before we go into your first active duty command, before we go into that, if we can just digress back into your training, did you, so you had then, you had the officers candidate school, then you went into communications.
That's correct. I didn't work in communications. I went to school for communications, but then I went into this administrative job on COMTRAPAC staff as a, quote, convenience, because they didn't know where else to put me for the time being.
So do you going back to like either OCS or to the communication school, Paul, do you have any vivid memories of that time as you're going through? And more specifically, what would be the best part and the worst part?
Well, the best part about Officer Candidate School and OCS, the discipline it taught you to blend in with those around you. We're all different people, and I mean, if there's one thing I had a challenge my whole life, is I have an attitude. I always have opinions, and I always have a point of view that may not agree with those sitting around me. Well, you go to OCS and you learn how to blend in with a group of 30, 40, 50 others around
In
you,
other words, tolerance.
and they gave us jobs to do.
In other words, they get you learn to at least be tolerant.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And you had to learn the skills, I'll call it the verbal discipline, so that you're treated with respect and you treat others with respect as part of that verbal discipline.
And we'll come back to that part towards the end as far as reflections, I think. And what was the worst part?
The worst part, separated from family.
Okay.
When you all of a sudden drop everything and disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. My mother, I was the only male in the household, and my mother needed help, and I was gone. And that's when I relied on my brother-in-law, Ray, to help my mother when she had to have help. Mm-hmm. Being in a immediate separation mode for family when your whole life was family prior to that was another learning experience that when you put your head on a pillow at night, you'd swallow and say, "Oh my gosh, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing in that process?"
And does any particular instructor at either the OCS or at the comm school stand out?
There were some instructors at OCS that were tied more to how you think. And those were the instructors that impressed me, because we would be in these groups and we'd go somewhere, and I had a couple of lecturers who, I think they were like Navy lieutenants or whatever, and they'd been through some of the previous combat work that they were in, and they would lecture us on what we're going to experience and how we need to get our head around how to get the job done.
Yeah.
How to do it safely, how to not endanger those around you, and be as efficient in the process to do that. And I had this one instructor used to talk about, okay, you're not going to agree with some of your senior officers. Now what do you do? How do you disagree with a senior officer that you don't think they got the answer right?
Right.
And this lieutenant used to lecture us on how to do it tactfully, how to be respectful and humbling, but yet get the message across. And watching that process, that's what makes our U.S. I believe what makes our U.S. military as strong as it is, because we have those interactive capabilities.
Okay. Was there a hard part of the training? Of either, was it difficult to make that transition from civilian to military?
The hardest part, again, was the separation.
Okay.
The physical part, candidly, I enjoyed. Being athletic, not a big deal. I can run 5 miles, not an issue.
Yeah.
And I could march with stuff and carry things, to the point that I was also very helpful to other candidates that needed help, so I could pitch in and those kinds of.
Was that an unwritten expectation for the people that want to be?
It wasn't part of the expectation, but in my heart, it was part of what I felt my responsibility was. The good Lord gave me the strength and the ability to get the job done. Now let's be as broad as possible in the process of doing that, and you know what, it earned respect beyond that event. Now people recognized that there was more to you than just that hat you put on. you literally
human being.
You were something.
Yeah. And
that earned it. And you know what? When I saw that, I go, wow, cool. It matters. And it was I'll say, some of the very early low-level leadership experiences that helped me start to build my own life career in that process.
More on that towards the end, Paul.
Yeah.
Now, Paul, before I interrupted you the second time, you went ahead, graduated from OCS. You took your 3-week course at Com School.
Right.
You go get your orders. You get your orders to the USS Whitney, Mount
Whitney, right.
And it developed needed repairs.
And it gets canceled.
So what? So take it.
So what happened was the orders were canceled because they needed to fix the ship. They didn't need more people walking around. And the Bureau of Personnel, the staff guy who called me, described the situation where this command in San Diego, California, needed, I use the word paper pushers. They needed administrative support, and they saw that I had skills from my collegiate degree and whatever, and they said, okay, we're going to send you to this command in San Diego and put you on a 2-star admiral staff.
Wow.
And there were 15 senior officers on that staff, lieutenant commander or greater. And all of these officers were in charge of certain types of training that they were experts at. Anti-air warfare, nuclear weapons warfare, submarine warfare, you name it. These guys were senior officers who were experts in this field. And I showed up there, and my boss, they didn't know where to put me because it was a job that didn't exist yet. And they put me under the flag lieutenant, who was a lieutenant commander. And all of a sudden I show up, and I look at Commander Nelson, and he looks at me, he goes, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I says, "Commander, I don't know. They put me here to help out with paperwork." "Oh, you're going to help me with paperwork?" "Yes." "Oh, wonderful." So all of a sudden, this commander saw the ability to be more efficient in what he had to get done.
The value.
So he would push stuff at me, you know, and I'd go back in the office, and I'm pumping, getting things organized and getting things set up and what have you and whatever. And then I look at these other senior officers, and I hate to put it this way, but they hated their job. They did not want to be senior officers on a staff that did training and write training manuals, and they wanted to go fight wars. These guys knew their job, and they wanted to do what they knew how to do.
Yeah.
And I'd watch them, and I'd go, wow. And to make a long story short, one of the assignees that were put under me were 2 Navy chiefs, a yeoman chief and a radioman chief. The yeoman chief, Chief Strickland, he would watch me, and he'd say, he knew I was 4 months out of OCS, right? And he'd look at me and he'd go, "Welcome, Ensign Kosieracki." Ha, ha, ha. You know, these chiefs, they knew I didn't know crap, but they would work with me to get the job done.
Yeah.
And these Navy chiefs were just unbelievable in what they did. So one day I'm watching these guys work, and I'm watching these senior officers not being very effective in their training manuals and what they were doing. And I grabbed Chief Strickland. I said, "Chief, come here. I have an idea." I said, "You have first-class petty officers that are just outstanding. You taught these guys how to do things that I'm shocked. What if we take each of these petty officers and assign them to one of our senior officers and let them and help them with their training manuals?" And Chief Strickland looks at me and he goes, "Hey, that could work." So he talks to all his first-class petty officers, and when we go to a couple of the senior officers and laid out the idea, and they're staring like this, you know, and you know, when someone doesn't believe I know what the hell I'm talking about, they stare at me, you know. Well, next thing you know, we assigned these petty officers. They sat across the desk from these senior officers, and all of a sudden these senior officers, they sat back and they started to dictate what they wanted in the manuals. And these guys are writing like crazy. And within weeks, they got the job done that would have been taking 6-8 months. Well, after this
Did they
thing,
make the structural change? Did they make that now a part of the policy?
well, not yet, but they're working it. It was starting to build. And my boss, the flag lieutenant, calls me in. He goes, "How can we set this up?" And I says, "Well, Commander, if you sit with Chief Strickland, my chief, the 2 of you guys can set that up.
Yeah.
You know how to get that done." "Yeah, you're right." And I says, I'm an ensign. I don't have power to set it up, but you guys do.
Yeah.
And so they established a
process.
rotating routine
Yeah.
for what these petty officers were good at to where they sat and what they did. So
So it made it more efficient.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
2 months into this, my chief of staff, Captain Lilly, who my boss reported to, he was a four-striper and he was chief of staff of the entire command. He calls me in the office, and I was nervous. What the hell's he call? And he sat down, he looked at me, and he goes, Paul, how did you have this idea? I said, Captain, I don't know. I watch people work, and I just think about how can we do the job better? And he goes, well, you know what? You're doing a hell of a job for us. I go, well, thank you, Captain. And he says, the senior officers that are working on this, they actually enjoy doing what they're doing now.
That's great.
And I said, oh, that's wonderful.
That's
you know.
great.
He says, I'll get back to you.
Right.
So he dismisses me then. And a few days later, he calls me back in the office. My admiral's sitting there, Admiral Newton Foss, two-star admiral. He's sitting there. And I go, oh, crap. And I was looking around to see if I was really supposed to come into the office or not. And Captain Lilly says, Paul, come here, sit down. So I sat down, and all of a sudden, Admiral Foss looks at me, and he goes, Paul, you're doing a hell of a job for us. I go, thank you, Admiral. I appreciate that. He says, what do you want to do with your Navy career? And I says, I don't know, Admiral. I just want to do the best job I know how to do. He says, you know, you're going to be here for a few more months, and then Bureau of Personnel is going to put you somewhere. I know. He goes, well, do you want to stay on our staff? Admiral, if I'm getting the job done and everybody wants me on this staff, get that job, I'd love to stay on this staff. Number one, I love San Diego. My wife came, she loves San Diego, and I says, you know, I would love it. So Admiral looks at me first, and he points his finger at me. He goes, know this, though. You're going to stay on this staff, but you won't have a Navy career. Know this. If you don't learn to drive ships and learn what junior officers do on a ship, you're not a Navy officer. I said, yes, sir, Admiral, I know that. Having said that, I still want you to get this job done here for us. I go, yes, sir, do it. He wired Bureau of Personnel and canceled any orders for me. And my 6-month orders now became 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Because I had a commitment of a 4-year active, 2 years reserve as part of my 6-year program. And to make a long story short, effectively I stayed on that staff for an entire 4 years and moved around doing what the Admiral and Chief of Staff needed me to do for administrative work and for interaction with the various senior officers as they work on getting their job done more efficiently.
Paul, before we started the interview, you talked a little bit about other experiences you had, and the thing that I'm wanted to focus in on, it was during Vietnam. About what year was it did you begin your duty at that staff?
I started activity on that staff in 1972.
72.
In 74, the Vietnam War was winding down.
Right.
But during those first 2 years, oh, it was terrible. A lot of the wounded and injured coming back from Vietnam came through San Diego. And aside from my command headquarters, I also served as a duty officer for the command. And as a duty officer, I had made lieutenant junior grade, and I was not an ensign anymore. I was now big shot. And I made lieutenant junior grade, and I was assisting, if you will, on some of the coordination across the various military assisting units for those both hurt physically and emotionally, because there's a lot of military that came back from Vietnam emotionally scarred in that process.
Now, the other thing that I asked you about, you know, definitely since you were in a training command, Paul, did you kind of get a feeling that in some of the work that you did, I know we talked about training manuals and administration, but you said you traveled around with an admiral. Did you, and your mission was training. Was there anything that you could think, any kind of instances where your training basically directly benefited the commands?
Yes,
in the
there
war?
was three of the subordinate commands under my admiral were what they called the Fleet Training Group, and this was a training command, one in San Diego, one in Yokosuka, Japan, and one in Pearl Harbor. And those three training commands for Fleet Training Group, they trained destroyer and active fighting ships on how to fight. They trained how to stay away from getting damaged. How do you maneuver a ship during combat situations to have the highest probability of success, so people don't get hurt and your property, your ship, doesn't get damaged.
And on that point, how did kind of getting a little more concrete, did you go around, based on my memories in the Navy, did you go around and do any tests or any inspections?
Yes.
Or any,
I used to fly, well, for the first few months I did not. There were other senior officers that used to do this, but then the admiral, I should tell you a separate story first,
Sure.
that gave me the confidence that the admiral trusted me. For a senior two-star admiral to trust a junior officer to get the job done, it takes a big step. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a big step. Mm-hmm. Well, on this command, there was a lieutenant commander who was part of the surface warfare destroyer Navy, and he was leading his way up and wanted command at sea on a destroyer, and his name was Commander Ferrier, and he was a weapons expert on destroyers and ships like that, and he got put on this staff. He hated the job. He was one of the guys who hated the job. He wanted to be on destroyers. Well, he came on our staff, and his job was to, again, work on training manuals and stuff like that. Well, even though I assigned, like I did, or mentioned, the petty officers to do the work, whatever, this commander would look at me as a junior ensign or as a junior JG, and what the hell are you doing here? You're a Navy officer. You should be out fighting wars. You're sitting on your ass behind a desk. And this commander used to really get irritated with me. Every time something little would go wrong, he'd call me in the office and rip me a new one. And it was one of those things where and I would walk around the headquarters trying to, maneuver so I wasn't causing more problem. Yeah. I wanted to be constructive, not destructive in the process. And little did I realize, the other senior officers who respected what I did also got upset with Ferrier. Mm-hmm. There was a word around that they wanted Ferrier to cool his jets. Mm-hmm. Let's cool it. Mm-hmm. Well, it was a friction, a big friction. One day I didn't realize it, but I had appreciated that the admiral also recognized it. Mm-hmm. So one day I get a phone call from my boss, a lieutenant commander, flag lieutenant, says, "Paul, we're going to Pearl Harbor tomorrow, and you're flying with the admiral and us. We're going to do a command inspection of the Fleet Training Group, and you're going to do the administrative inspection." Oh, okay. And he says, so we're leaving at 0700 out of Miramar Naval Air Station on the admiral's plane. Got it. Okay. So I get to the airport, or the naval station airport, and we on the plane, and we take off. I'm going, holy crap, I'm on an admiral's plane flying to Pearl Harbor. Are you kidding me? I mean, it was surreal. Mm-hmm. I had not had those experiences to that point. Well, about 10 minutes into the flight, the admiral comes up from the front deck to the main cabin where we were all sitting on by the windows of the plane. And he's going one by one with the other officers of who they're going to see, what they're going to inspect, what they're going to do, and he's going. This admiral, he knew his stuff, and he was going one by one, boom, 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 boom. He gets to me, And he looks at me and he goes, Paul, you ever been to Pearl Harbor before? No, sir, Admiral. I'm looking forward to it, and I want to do a good job. He goes, wait a minute. He reaches on my lap. I had all my inspection papers that I was going to be using. And he picks up my inspection papers, and he walks over to Commander Ferrier, who was sitting. And he goes, Commander, I want you to cover for Paul. I want him to see Pearl Harbor tomorrow, and I want you to do both your job and his. The place went quiet. The whole airplane going, holy crap, you know. And I'm going, what? You know. And sure enough, the Admiral called ahead and set up tours for me to all of the famous tourist sites, but also the military sites, for me to spend 2 days seeing Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
And it was courtesy of my Admiral to do that.
Wow.
And basically, looking back on it, it was his respect for a job I did, and why I deserved that. Number two, he wanted to give a message to Ferrier, get off of his back. Well, flying back 3 days later, we're on a plane coming back, and we're all sitting there, and Admiral goes go with all the officers of what they inspected, what they saw, blah, 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 blah. He gets to me, and he says, how was your tour of Pearl? Oh, Admiral, you know, and I started to go into it, but he didn't want to talk about it, but he at least knew I had a good time and I enjoyed it and learned something from it. He goes to Ferrier, and sure enough, Ferrier had his inspection paperwork, he had mine. And the man did a wonderful job. I mean, he was good. Don't get me wrong, he was a jerk, but he was good. And he did it all. And I go, whew, you know. So the next morning, I get into the office, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I better go talk to Commander Ferrier and see if I can mend the ways or patch something up or whatever. So I walk over to his office, and I knock on the door, and I go, Commander, can I speak with you for a moment? He looks up, and he goes, Paul, get in here. And he points to the chair. He goes, sit down. I sat down, and I was ready to start to talk about my concerns or what. He raises his hand. He says, Paul, first of all, you don't need to say anything. Secondly, that whole Pearl Harbor experience had nothing to do with you seeing Pearl Harbor. It had everything to do with the Admiral telling me to clean up my effing act. He says, you know, it's much better than a bad fitness report. And I'm going to get the job done now better. And you and I are going to get along, and thank you for stopping in. Goodbye. And he dismisses me. But he recognized that the Admiral wasn't going to take his crap the way he was acting on that staff. And he swallowed and said, okay, I'm going to do it right. And sure enough, the months following that, Ferrier was a new man. And when I think of leadership, and I think of my Admiral, of what he did to create a much better leader in Commander Ferrier, in a way that was, I'll say, constructive and a win-win.
Yeah. Paul, thanks for that story. Now, as far as you did the inspection over in Pearl Harbor, your first, obviously. Did you do any other in Yokosuka?
Following that, I used to travel. The Admiral knew I was good at traveling with him. So I used to fly with him, even with smaller groups, when the big guys weren't there, to other commands where they would do the top administrative inspection. And I would, again, take notes for the Admiral of what the senior officers were doing for an improvement project and how that improvement project was measured. Measuring is so important.
Measuring or graded?
Measuring results of improvement programs.
Was there, in other words, they're already on a, they already needed,
some were started.
Remedial, they already needed remedial.
Right. So what the Admiral wanted me to do is the ones that were further down that road and doing a good job, take notes. Know how they're doing it, and let's pick it up and take it over to the one that needed work.
Best practices.
And that's what we were doing.
Best practices.
And I best practices. Thank you. And I was, excuse me, I was the gopher for the Admiral to get that done in a way that was the win-win.
And it had direct, Paul, it had direct impact on our our forces in the Pacific at that time?
It had direct impact on every training command that were training fighting soldiers, fighting ships, and fighting, I'll say, defense. How do you defend something? And that's what so much of these activities were there as part of the training program, to put in place a structure that reinforced it.
Of best practices.
Best practices.
And the execution thereof.
Correct.
So you feel even though, as I discussed, myself and Joe, we weren't in theater, but we're not even sure we had any impact at all. But through that process, you feel you had an impact?
Oh, absolutely. I believe, I say me, teamed with the Admiral and our command, I believe I had a very significant impact on cascading these best practices across a broader base that made our Pacific Fleet much more effective for the job they need to get done.
Now, during this time on active duty, Paul, did you have any time? I know you're married. Your wife was with you. Did you have any time to make any friendships? Or
I made friends at some of the military locations where I would go. I was not good at it, but I started taking target shooting practice.
Yeah.
So I would go to the pistol range in San Diego and learn how to fire various weapons for both personal knowledge, but also a little bit of enjoyment, if you will, to learn something new. And through that vehicle, I made friends. There were others like me who were trying to build up their skill set and so on.
Did I know you had your family? Did you have any children when you were?
Well, while we were in San Diego, my wife and I were married in 1970. So while I was in San Diego, we were in the first 2-3 years of our marriage, and my wife became pregnant, and my son, who now lives in Western New York still, was born to my wife in San Diego, California, at Balboa Naval Hospital. So here, my wife, who number one is scared about having a baby, and scared of the whole process, we show up at Balboa Hospital, and I'll call it the regimentation of a military hospital added to the training, if you will, necessary for them in that hospital to work on the people that end up in that military hospital.
Yeah.
But she swallowed and said, okay, let's go for this, But when our son Kevin was born, and all of the nurses and military that worked that shift showed up there to help her celebrate the new baby.
Oh, great.
It was like absolutely unbelievable.
And then you talked about did you have to stay in shape back then?
Oh yeah.
Did you do, like, I know you talked about marksmanship, pistol.
Yeah, but we'd also do physical exercise type activities. And some of these friends that I mentioned, we belonged to a military workout center that was part of that process. There wasn't as many from my command, because these senior officers on this command were so tied into what they do.
Yeah.
Under my chiefs, I have a chief radioman and a chief yeoman, there were younger enlisted that I would hang out with them a bit, and they would be very careful to not break the officer enlisted sort of, quote, phantom bridge.
Right.
But it's unbelievable how professional they were at doing that.
Yeah.
That I did not have to feel like, oh, you can't cross this line,
Right. Right. In other words, you can't be overly friendly and that.
They were all extremely professional how they did their job, to the point that when things got serious on the staff about some issue, I knew I could trust these guys. They knew what the hell they were doing, and I could tell they wanted me to be successful. They did not want to see me as a young officer screw something up.
Fail. Or fail.
They wanted me to be very, very good at what I did.
Yeah.
And that made me proud
Yeah.
to know they felt that way.
Did do you recall any particular humorous or unusual events, either humorous or unusual?
Of events that occurred?
Yeah, during your active duty?
Well, in 1972, one of the things, we were what we used to call 1 in 6 duty officers. Every 6th day, I was duty officer for the entire command. Mm-hmm. And that entire command included our headquarters and all the subordinate commands spread across the Pacific Fleet. And being duty officer, I spoke for my admiral.
For the command.
The duty officer, for anything that occurred, you had to deal with the reality of what situation was there.
The buck stopped with you.
And every 6th day, I would wake up in the morning and say, okay, I got to get serious here. Now, 99% of the things that went on administratively with the staff was a little bit of BS.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't a lot of serious stuff.
Yeah.
But yet you still had to check the box.
Yeah.
Fill in the paperwork and make sure it was. And so I made sure administratively we filled the responsibilities for doing that.
Yeah.
Having said that, it was very frequent at night. I'd get phone calls in the middle of the night. My admiral would have a requirement for a phone call or a conversation, if important, for radio messages that were flash. Mm-hmm. There were different types of radio messages: routine, priority, high priority, flash. A flash message had to be handled as fast as humanly possible as part of the requirements of the military dynamics. Well, when I was a duty officer, if we got a flash message, the listed duty radioman would have to call the duty officer and let him know what happened. And they could speak to it on the phone as long as it wasn't considered classified. They could speak to the words that were unclassified, but had to be careful. So it's common when you're in the middle of the night, you get a phone call. This is Radioman Robinson.
During the duty day.
And at the duty desk, and we have a flash message for Admiral Foss. Subject, and they'd read the subject, and then, okay, we'll take care of it in the morning. Thank you. We hang up the phone, but they did their job.
You make that decision.
And I would show up at 6 in the morning, get the message, and made sure administratively we did what was necessary for that process.
You make a decision whether you could wait till the morning or not.
By having the duty desk tell me what the action was, I knew it could wait till 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
When the other officers were around, that we could chase around and do what we had to do. But it was deemed flash message because they wanted to get the word out. They didn't want it sitting in a waiting room.
In a pile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was that. Having said that, in August of 1972, there was a conflict going on between the U.S., North Korea, China, and some degree in the Middle East. Anyways, it was a lot of friction going on.
Tense.
And the DOD sent out a flash message, and the head of the military set up a position, what they call DEFCON 3. For those who aren't aware of DEFCON, it stands for Defense Condition. DEFCON 5, 4, 3, 2. DEFCON 1 is war. DEFCON 3 had to have certain activities validated for the readiness of the military to deal with the next important steps. Mm-hmm. Well, in the middle of the night, in August of 72, I get a phone call. I was a duty officer from Radioman Robinson on the duty desk saying, Lieutenant Kosieracki, we have a flash message. Subject, DEFCON 3. I can't read anything else. It is confidential. I said, okay, Robinson, thank you very much. I'll take care of it in the morning. And I hung up the phone. It couldn't have been 2 minutes later. The phone rings again. Lieutenant Kosieracki, Radioman Robinson calling back again. This is a no-shitter. You better get your ass in here. Robinson, I'll be right there. And sure enough, I get my Captain Lilly on the phone, Chief of Staff, told him.
What time was it?
It was about 4 in the morning. Ooh. I got Captain Lilly on the phone, and I said, Captain, I'm heading into the office. DOD set DEFCON 3. Captain Lilly goes, what? Really? I go, yes, I'll be there. I said, Captain, I'm going to go in. He goes, no, I'll be there. Sure enough, our Chief of Staff came in too. And we got a hold of, one of the responsibilities is the captain had to get a hold of the head officer of every subordinate command throughout the Pacific Fleet. Within 2 hours, he had to report back to Washington the state of readiness. And because we were a commander training Pacific, there were 7 or 8, maybe 9 ships under my admiral's control for training purposes. They were in there for training, but they're still under my admiral's control. Mm-hmm. Within 2 hours, every one of those ships had to report to Washington how many personnel are on board, how many are on leave, the state of weaponry on the ship. It was all wired as to what had to be reported. Yeah. And the commanding officers of each of those ships, they knew exactly what they had to do. It was just us getting to them and establishing the guidelines for. And Captain Lilly, he came over to me and he says, Paul, you did a hell of a job. I said, Captain, I'm going to promote Radioman Robinson. Yeah. He made this day happen. Mm-hmm. And I told
Captain. So like you were treated with respect for your competency, and you went ahead and reciprocated.
Absolutely. Well, when Robinson did what he did, I knew these enlisted, that's how we mentioned earlier in this conversation, these enlisted guys knew they wanted me to succeed. Had Robinson not liked me or wanted to say, okay, I'll get him, he hung up on me.
And just let it go. He made a decision. Yeah.
Well, fast forward about 3 weeks, there were 6 senior flag-ranked officers relieved from command for not handling that situation properly across the entire country. 6 flag-ranked officers, not only Navy, but it was Navy, Air Force, whatever, really? That didn't do the job properly with that DEFCON 3.
And so
they were relieved of duty.
This is serious business.
It was serious, absolutely serious. And my admiral, when he realized what the hell we did, he knew the consequences could have been extremely serious in that process. Sure. I go through this story not to sound overwhelming, but it was beyond my comprehension. And it had not been people around me who knew exactly what they had to do, from my captain, from my chief of staff, to my radioman. They all did the job, and I go, wow.
Yeah. Very positive about teamwork and everything, Paul, really great. So, any other stories about when your 4 years, which I find very, very interesting? Any other stories, however they were, sad,
you want to hear the story? I'll verbalize my lunch I had with
Zuma.
Our chief of naval operation. His experiences, if you will. Zumwalt, Admiral Zumwalt was known as the sailor's admiral. He had such a respect for the breadth of the Navy at every level there. Zumwalt had a policy that once every year at minimum, he would travel around to every flag staff in the military or in the Navy, and everywhere in the world, every flag staff.
Did you explain to Joe, he asked about that flag staff, what it was? What's a flag staff?
Flag is meaning above rank of captain. You start wearing the star.
Okay, and
if you wear If you wear the
means you're-
star,
that means you're in charge of either a base or you're in charge of multiple
bingo.
craft.
When you're a flag ranked officer, you're either an admiral, a general, or you know, you carry that status.
You're a senior high level officer.
Bingo.
Yeah.
You're a very, very senior officer, and you came up the ranks, earning those stepping stones to that. And when Admiral Zumwalt meets with these flag ranked officers, he has requirements. What are you doing here, here, here? Zumwalt had set a set of standards for what he expected the flag ranked admirals to do as part of their job. And as part of that responsibility, he had a personal desire, and he did this. He would meet with every flag ranked staff for lunch at least once a year. I got a phone call one day from my boss, and he says, "Paul, wear your dress uniform tomorrow. We're having lunch with Admiral Zumwalt." I go, "What?" Well, Zumwalt shows up at our headquarters in San Diego, and they open up one of our banquet rooms and put in a big table, and they set it all up. And all of the staff officers are sitting there according to rank. At the head of the table is Admiral Zumwalt, my admiral, my two-star, my chief of staff, boom, 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 boom. And everybody was sitting in rank according to their, through the court. And Lieutenant J.G., I had just made Lieutenant junior grade. So Lieutenant J.G. Kosieracki was sitting down at the end of the table on the left-hand side, and I'm watching, and I'm going, oh my God. And every one of them had their nameplates in front of them. So during the course of this meal that was being served.
Did you have one?
Say again, please?
Did you have a nameplate?
Oh, yeah, I had a name tag. Lieutenant J.G. Paul Kosieracki. It was sitting there in front of me. And during the course of the meal, Zumwalt would go officer by officer by officer. Well, Lieutenant, or Commander, what'd you do before you came to the staff? Oh, I was on this ship, did this. I learned how to do this. And what do you want to do when you finish the staff assignment? Oh, Admiral, I'd love to have command at sea. If there's anything you can do. And it'd go back and forth.
That's the line.
Back and forth, back and forth. About dessert time, we get down to Lieutenant J.G. Kosieracki. And Zumwalt's sitting there, and he looks at my name tag, and he goes, "Paul, what did you do before you got on this staff? What's this lieutenant junior grade doing on this flag staff sitting here?" And he looked at me, and I said, "Oh, Admiral, I was in officer candidate school." And Zumwalt looks around, the room goes quiet, and everybody, they're going, "Oh, wow." "Well, Paul, what do you want to do when you finish this staff assignment?" "Well, Admiral, I'll probably go back to civilian life because I'm going to go into the business world. But I want you to know how hard I am working, and number two, really enjoy this assignment on this staff." "Oh, okay, I see." And everybody around here, they're all looking, trying to look like they're invisible. And Zumwalt then looks to my admiral, Newton Foss, and he goes, "Newt, the Kitty Hawk's in port this weekend. They're doing a Dependence cruise. Mommy and the kids are going to tour around the harbor, and they're going to see what. Maybe you can get Paul on the ship to see what the shipboard life's all about." Everybody just roared, absolutely roared. I'm going, "Oh my gosh," you know. And I go, "Oh, Admiral, that'd be good. I'd enjoy the Kitty Hawk. Thank you." Well, anyways, lunch was over. Everybody peels off, and they're going away. My Admiral Foss took Zumwalt aside, and I don't know. They were talking about courses of discussion and on and on and on. I go out the back door and try to sneak around to get to my office.
The sneak around.
Oh, I tried to, and standing in the intersection of the two main aisles, Zumwalt's standing there with my admiral, chief of staff, a couple other senior officers, and they're shooting the breeze about this and that, you know. And I go zipping by, and Zumwalt looks up. He goes, "Paul, I need to talk to you for a minute." And I go, "Oh my gosh, what the hell did I do now?" So I walk over to Admiral Zumwalt, and he looks at me and he goes, "Paul, I owe you an apology. I should never have made light of the hard work you're doing for us and our country. And my jokes were inappropriate. I sincerely apologize. Please accept my apology. And he also referenced the fact that Admiral Foss pointed out the kind of job I was doing on that staff. And I said to him, I said, Admiral, no apology necessary. Seriously, your sense of humor made us all smile. And I'm always trying to do the best job I know, but you should know how truly honored I am to meet you. And I said, please know that. He goes, well, thank you very much. And he shook my hand. He goes, Paul, thank you for your service. And he left. And I'm going, holy crap. Here's a chief of naval operation who felt it important enough to give me an apology for something that he thought was maybe not totally appropriate.
Yeah.
But it was like, wow.
The any other stories?
You want to show that other picture?
Oh, this.
Now, tell me about this.
Yeah,
tell us about this.
This is my leaving. I had several gatherings with my admiral across various events when I was promoted and with this and that. This is now Admiral Hill. He replaced my Admiral Foss. And when I was leaving the service, active duty, I was heading back to up to the western New York, to the Buffalo area. Well, Admiral Hill calls me in and gives me an award, the Meritorious Service Award, and designated that on my record, and gave me the ribbons to go with it. So here I was, a lieutenant junior grade, being awarded the Meritorious Service Award by my admiral after serving there for 4 years on that staff. Standing next to me is my wife, now of 52 years. This is my son, Kevin, that was born in Balboa Naval Hospital about a year and a half earlier than this. And this is, again, when he was giving me this, he asked for me to bring my family into the office because he wanted my family to see the recognition that was happening.
Now, thanks, Joe. So that's right as you were. That was your last day. Or?
No, this was the following month. I was discharged, and I was separated. Well, I wasn't separated. My active duty was turned into Naval Reserve.
Okay, then. And
then I had 2 years of Naval Reserve, active reserve, after I left San Diego.
Okay. And then, so Paul, my questions are at being in San Diego, which I thought was, my son continues to live in California. He kind of followed in a kind of really generally my footsteps, not in the military, but I knowing the great experience you had both professionally and personally, did you have the option of staying in?
I was offered to stay in the Navy from 3 different officers from various locations.
Would you have been able to stay in that area?
They wanted me to stay in and become a career naval officer.
Would you have been able to stay in that
I did research on that.
Mm-hmm.
For me to do that effectively, the fact that my first 4 years had very little seagoing experience, I was so far behind in being an effective naval officer. Mm-hmm. I chose to pass on that.
And was it the pull, Paul, knowing about what your background is, was it the pull of your family?
No, not as much. By then, my family was pretty flexible. I mean, they were globetrotting with me on different types of things. My family had been changing over in Western New York. They were different. So it wasn't as much a family pull anymore. It was more, okay, what do I want to do with my life?
Okay.
And while I was in the Navy active duty, I took correspondence courses and earned a Master's of Business Administration, my MBA in finance, actually paid for by the GI Bill.
Yeah.
So I got my MBA courtesy of the Navy GI Bill, and at that point, having my
Did
Navy experience.
Did you give you a leg up?
Oh, yeah. Having my Navy experience with the leadership and my awards, having my MBA in finance, I got a job offer with Eastman Kodak Company out of Rochester, New York, just like that.
Okay, and then before we go into like the more questions as far as you're under service, you sounded like you were really big on San Diego.
I enjoyed.
Did you ever think about staying there
I enjoyed San Diego
as a civilian?
as a civilian, but I knew from a corporate employment point of view, I needed to be secondary to where I wanted to live versus what was the job.
Right. The better, so the better.
So I went to 6 different companies, Eastman Kodak Company being one of them, and back in 1975,
75.
the recession had hit strong, and all these companies were letting people go.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't hiring. Well, I got called into the office in Rochester, New York, for Kodak. If anybody knows, is Kodak. It's called Kodak Park. It's one of the largest manufacturing facilities in the world at the time. And I got called in with my resume that I had put out and all my background, whatever. Sitting at the desk was the controller of Kodak Park and the director of accounting. The director of accounting had served in the Navy. The controller had served in the Air Force. And the two of them were joking about who had the better experience between Navy Air Force. And when they found out that I had this experience and an MBA in finance with honors, boom, they gave me an offer just like that.
And okay.
And I took it within 5 minutes.
And then anything remarkable about, they had to understand that you had a weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. Anything remarkable about that service? Anything that, as far as, like sentimental or?
The two of them that had their service, they'd served in wartime and had served during combat situations. Mm-hmm. When I told them that their comparisons to my desk job, they smiled and they go, "Yeah, we know all that. That's not an issue. We also know how dedicated you are to this country."
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Before we get into like the really into service, what do you think, Paul? As far as your life, looking back on it, what was the really best part? If you could even say a single part, what was the best part or parts of your service? What was the best part?
What I should say first, my life, my career, my experiences, my ability to work with people, my communication skills never would have been what it is today had it not been for my military experience. The Navy experience I had with the various officers that I've worked with, very close, very distant. I mean, even a Zoom wall, I go, oh my God. You learn how to digest the good, the bad. You learn how to fix the elements that are not so good. And I've put into my vocabulary a concept called the win-win. You never do a deal that's a good deal unless it's a win-win. Both parties get something out of what is necessary to make the job better. And I learned that through my Navy experience and through my working with various leaders over conflict, over improvement requirements, and over a pleasure of working together.
Yeah. Personalities, you dealt with many personalities.
So as I sat as a youngster in Western New York baling hay for my grandparents and look forward, how little did I know of what was ahead of me. Alls I did know, as I'll say, provided to me by my uncles and my family, whenever you're doing something, do it as good as you know how. You roll up those sleeves and never afterwards say, oh, I could have done better. You never say that. Mm-hmm. And those were family type, I'll say, leadership attitudes that when I took that into my military experience, it helped build on that respect and build on the mutual ability to get the job done.
Teamwork.
The teamwork effect of that.
What do you, Paul? What did you say? Whether it was in the military or after the military, the service, or after the service, what do you say to naysayers that are negative? I mean, how did you deal with those? Because you seem to be a positive guy.
No, I do one of three things. They're either so far out of it that I'm wasting my time trying to build a credible. Then I'm polite but dismissal.
In other words, they won't win-win.
Right.
They won't.
I don't insult them, but I dismiss the fact that I'm not even going to entertain your type of thought process. If someone's in the middle, they are the ones that they've earned my ability to spend some time with them to see if I can help create a win-win.
Yes, sir.
Out of that kind of situation. And those are the ones that over the years I've spent more time with that process.
So you would, of the people that you met, that you had to interact with, you make an assessment.
Right.
And if it's not, that they're not going to do win-win, where it's all me win and you lose, or me win and if you get something out of it, that's fine. When you get to you make the assessment if you could work with them. If they're open-minded. If not, you just move on.
I should tell you this to the fact that this isn't over. My 4 years active, 2 years active reserve, I still have my Navy hat that I wear. 2.5 weeks ago, I was in Walmart with my wife shopping, wearing my Navy hat. I was walking down the frozen food aisle. A guy tapped me on the shoulder. He says, "Do you have a minute?" "Sure." He points to my hat. I need your advice. Standing next to him were his two sons. He's talking to two of his sons about what they're going to potentially do for military experience. He had served in the military, was not an officer, but was struggling. I took him and his two sons over to the coffee area where people sit down, and we sat and talked for 15 minutes. Actually, my wife got a little irritated with me. She had some things she had to do, but then she realized I was talking to that guy about something important, so then she checked out.
So that stays with you.
But I had a conversation with these two young guys, sponsored by their father, to give them how to think about it. Mm-hmm. You know, how do you create the right decision process for your life? Yeah. It's got to be here, and it's got to be here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Paul. Do you, well, let's go back a little bit, and it's kind of a particular thing. How about the last day you were on active duty? What was it? You like relieved, or like you kind of sad, or was it a bunch of?
It was mixed.
Mixed.
It was exciting because I had a young boy who needed a dad with more.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Close it up.
Close it up.
Yeah, my last day of service. Are we good on this?
Yes.
Was mixed because I had a wife and now a son that were going to be driving back cross country from San Diego to Rochester, New York, where I had accepted a job position. I was very mixed with what I got to do to be a good father for my young son when my wife was taking care of all the responsibilities during my very active period of time as serving active duty on that military base. And So now she is looking for more of a tag team. Having said that, as I reflect back on the experiences that made me a better person, I now think, now how do I turn this into a keeping win-win future? And not just, oh, those were 4 years of my life, goodbye. You had to be, I'll say, disciplined with your own mindset on how you put that together. And that's what I've done. And as I've started in the corporate world, I would always get involved with, I'll say, the political dynamics of American corporations, while I was also take a deep breath and say, okay, now how do I put this in the best fashion for success?
Do you? So you returned right home, right?
I'll say again.
After you left, Paul, if you left active duty, you returned from San Diego right home.
Right. Now, while I was in New York, though, my 2 years active reserve, I would go to the meetings and what have you.
But
Candidly, those weren't as efficient or as useful as I thought they would be.
Because it's like you spend 8 hours, 2 days a month, and then bye, and then you're gone.
Yeah.
Do you? And going back, were you received well by your family, by your extended family and your community?
Oh yeah, everybody. Number one, I respected the fact that I did my military assignment and did it in a way. When they saw some of my success, they knew I did the job well.
They knew you did.
And it was.
They didn't know you just did counting days. You're just doing your time.
No.
You did something.
It was very good.
You talked about you used the GI. Did you? Was there any readjustment to civilian life?
I'd say the biggest readjustment is, okay, I'm in charge now. You know, even though you're in the military and you have certain leadership responsibilities, when you look up the rules, the regulations, when I moved into civilian life, okay, I'm in charge. I need to be
of your success or failure.
Right. I need to be successful with my family, but also with the business world.
Okay. The balance.
And as I built my military experiences and into a corporate career, I spent 31 years with Eastman Kodak Company in the corporate world, and that's another whole story of what happened there in the world of leadership.
Okay.
And I'm writing a book about it.
Well, great. I'd like to.
But all the way, leading it all the way down to the bankruptcy of Kodak. Long after I had retired from Kodak, that bankruptcy never should have happened.
And in the book, Paul, you'll detail why you think it went bankrupt.
Being a finance guy, I saw the results, I saw the facts, and I also saw decision behavior that was inappropriate.
Okay.
At the very top.
Now going back to for a minute to your service, did you continue any friendships? And this is more probably for an enlisted, but did you continue any friendships after service?
Not from the military itself.
Okay.
Yeah, that I would stay in touch with some of them, but the years went by, and you know, separation of years tied to separation of miles.
Yeah.
It just kind of, yeah, there was no real follow on. I actually, due to my socializing, sometimes earn more respectful friendship discussions than I've had in any other way.
And then 4 years isn't a long time. Did you? Now you said you a member of MOA?
Yes.
Okay. Now did you?
I was a member of MOA for many years.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Under my original location. Mm-hmm. I've recently been joined MOA Cape Canaveral chapter, and I now have a lifetime membership at MOA CC.
Okay.
And I'm meeting with. In fact, last Thursday, I met with them at their location, IRCC. And we went through a variety of discussions. Okay. So I'll be part of what they got going on and what they've asked for me for. Am I prepared, or would I be prepared to give some guest lectures?
That's great.
On various subjects.
Great. Right.
And I said, sure,
Right.
let's talk about it. I says, I want to be disciplined enough to have it matter that it's not just BS.
Yeah.
But I'll be glad to give. When I first moved to San Diego, when I first moved here to Titusville, I was a teacher at Eastern Florida State College. I lectured in the world of business and taught courses there. And I had
Joe taught there back.
Oh, okay. And it was fun. The only challenge in that front is, okay, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Where do you go with it? You don't want to be redundant with every course you teach.
Right.
But anyways, having said that, I ended up opening up my own company, K&S Commercial here, and I act as a business consultant to about 5 or 6 companies around town here.
Okay.
And I enjoy the heck out of it.
Okay. You already done that. How did your? Okay, so we talked. I think you've already covered this, Paul. How did your service affect the way you relate to others? I think we've already talked about it.
How I relate to who?
How you relate to others. In other words, the win-win. That was the main takeaway.
Yeah, my service experiences have reinforced the reality that you're not always going to get your way. That there's opinions that, okay, so be it. How do you take that and at least maybe twist it a little bit to make it the best you can?
Yeah.
And go from there. 30 seconds worth, but I have one client that has a big investor in his company beyond him. And I got on the wrong side of this guy because one of the things I reinforced that to my client, you never sell more than 49% of your company. If you don't have 51% of your company, you don't own that company. Mm-hmm. You are not the boss. Mm-hmm. So he created an environment where only 49% is out there for investors. And this guy who put big money into his company is pissed at me. But hey, you know, I tried to explain to him, put yourself in his shoes. But nonetheless, big money, they don't always like to hear someone not playing their game.
What was the chief way that service changed you? The chief way?
The biggest way the service changed me is to open my ears and listen broadly. Mm-hmm. I need to have enough input so my opinionated attitude is never tainted, but look out there and say, what's the most effective process here? And by being in a very disciplined environment like the military, mm-hmm. while the jobs that got to be done are dangerous, are complicated, are never the same today versus tomorrow, how do you blend that and make yourself useful to the process? And that's where I think my military experience gave me the best set of skills.
Now, I know we've probably touched on this next one, but life lessons. What are some of the life lessons you learned from the Navy in this case?
Yeah. How do you protect yourself and your family? Okay. A life lesson tied to know what the checks and balances are, both from a medical point of view, but also from a work style point of view. And what the military taught me is how those checks and balances and how that discipline plays with how you act each morning when you get up out of your bed.
Okay, this is one, Paul, that I haven't thrown at you. No type of nuance. How has the military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
About more of the military in general?
How has military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
It's given me, my military experience has given me enough desire and insight on how to research something to try to be knowledgeable beyond the surface. When I think of our war activities in various countries, what goes on in various countries from a conflict versus, and one of the things I really worry about is versus a China who thinks they're going to buy the U.S. out someday and own us.
Mm-hmm.
That element versus the Ukraine or others where you're dealing with being useful but not being overly dangerous to the structure of our country.
Yeah.
And that's the blend. That's the
Very
blend.
good.
The other thing it's done for me, candidly, I get very cynical over some of our politicians of what they say versus what they do and how they act versus what BS they're trying to do for the monetary gain.
Yeah.
And having said this, my whole life I thought I was a very conservative Republican, but at my age today, I scratch my head sometimes and say, wait a minute, we have a variety of motives underway that need to be evaluated. Mm-hmm. Blending the political with the military dynamics is important to our country, and candidly is a bit worrisome.
Yeah.
In my mind.
All right, Paul. We're going to take a little bit of a change here. What do you wish more people knew about veterans? What do you wish more people knew about veterans?
What they knew about?
What do you wish that, the average American, we know how a lot of the young people that, as far as American history, they're kind of really not that good at. They didn't pay attention. But now we're going to talk about veterans, the ones that went ahead and there was, based on our political structure, we went in.
What I think is important for those who are not engaged to at least put enough time into what is useful knowledge versus what is political favoritism.
Okay.
And blending that we all have that responsibility, just as a voter. Mm-hmm. As a voter, we have responsibility to put our best foot forward when it comes to blending and dealing with those dynamics. When you're dealing with the military side of it and global conflict, what is, what I'll say, smart versus silly versus dangerous needs to be better understood.
Okay.
And I don't claim to understand it myself, except I at times I know when to raise my hand and say, wait a minute here.
Yeah. The thing about it is, though, it seems to me that you think that people, just like voters, they should be knowledgeable of not only the people and their backgrounds, but the where they stand,
right,
and about even issues that don't involve offices. You need to be educated about what they're voting on. So but and then we apply it to the military and to the politicians that tell the military what to do. They need to be understanding of that as well.
Well, the important thing there is each individual. Remember, we're a free country. We have freedom to think as we want to think, and not endanger others, but have the right to try to earn a living as financially attractive as possible. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you do that in a win-win way without being
back to win-win,
without scamming somebody or doing something?
Do it in an honorable way,
right?
And where there's both of us win,
right? And that's why I feel so proud of my consulting that I'm doing, because I feel I make brilliant technical people into better business people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that is what's necessary in our country, in my judgment.
Paul, got about three more. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view
Yep.
this recording.
I believe all future generations should consider some form of military commitment, whether it be a reserve activity, a
Public service.
a public service type activity, and or even reinforcing those that are dedicating their lives to it.
Support.
Provide them with an emotional and physical support, and that I think is a win-win.
Okay.
Because it does create a stronger country.
Is there anything you've always wanted to share about your service that you never have, or anything?
Only, I guess, back in 1972, back in 1969, when the draft lottery put me in line, I would scratch my head and say, "Why me? Why me?" Then I realized, two of my high school graduates that I graduated from my small little country school from died in Vietnam. Two of them, C.J. Hall and Cliff Logston.
And then you thought about that a little different.
And I think about that frequently.
Yeah.
They were on my sports teams, and I knew them well. And we used to love to get in each other's way when we were playing sports. But when I found out that they lost their lives in Vietnam, I would say, wait a minute, there's a better way in life to create the win-win we want and need.
Thank you, Paul. And final question. Of all we've talked about over these 2 hours, what would you like people to know or remember from your story? What would you what's the
I think I would like them most to remember or think about is how dedicated I was to making our country better, to doing the job that you're asked to do in a most effective way, and then use that knowledge to be successful in other elements of your life.
And at this point, Paul, Joe and I would like to thank you for for your service and for you giving us this opportunity to hear your story. Thank you.
My
sir.
pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I want you both to know, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, I talk too much, how honored I am to be part of this. I really am. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.